Hey everyone, Jim Branscombe here. We're about to continue our journey into the mouth of Cinemadness. I'm really not sure why I'm doing this voice, but this is a sub-series of the Cinematic Void vlog where I talk about the movies that I watched growing up that, basically formed the foundation for what eventually would become Cinematic Void. The movie we're talking about today is probably one of the most beloved 80s horror movie classics. It is Return of the Living Dead.
They've come back to life. They're hungry, and they're not vegetarians.
It was directed by Dan O'Bannon, who was one of the writers on Alien. It's based on a book by John A. Russo, who was the co-writer of Night of the Living Dead, and at least the book was supposed to be his sequel continuation of the Night of the Living Dead mythos, but for this movie, it's more of a bit of a meta flip. It's also, it's one of the funniest and fun horror comedies. Has a great punk rock soundtrack, millions of memorable quotes, maybe not millions, but lots of memorable quotes.
More brave.
So how I first came across Return of the Living Dead was at a point in time where if you go back and watch the Night of the Living Dead episode, I was terrified of zombies and wasn't kind of terrified to watch horror movies. I just the idea of being scared was scary, so I didn't watch them. And this is going to take a little explaining, so bear with me. So my family, or my dad's side of the family, were big into trap shooting. If you don't know what it is, it's basically you sit on outside and there's like this, you shoot these orange clay pigeons or, targets or whatever. You yell, pull, you shoot them. My grandfather was actually Maryland state champion at this at one point, and most of my family on my dad's side were big into trap shooting, and they would always do events or league shoots or things like that on weekends. So one of these weekends, I don't remember which place we were at or which location. It might have been one of the trap shooting places in like Pennsylvania, like Quarryville or something like that. But they have a clubhouse there where all the shooters and their families hang out in between their turns at the events or whatever. And on the TV there, it was playing Return of the Living Dead. Now this was on the Sci-Fi channel, back when Sci-Fi was spelled S-C-I-F-I before it's S-Y-F-Y. And I was kind of like, oh my God, they're playing some crazy horror movie at this place and I don't want to watch it, but then I couldn't stop watching it. It was playing as a double feature on TV with Killer Clowns from Outer Space, and that movie was like terrifying to me for some reason, but I'll talk more about that in the episode that's going to follow this, because this is a two-parter, I guess, on the way, because I saw both of these movies at the same time. But anyway, that was my first exposure to Return of the Living Dead. Follow up a few years later when I finally watched Night of the Living Dead and I was getting into horror movies and cult films and stuff, I rented Return of the Living Dead and revisited it. Sort of like I had this idea in my head that like Evil Dead 2 was this big scary horror movie. That was my perception of Return of the Living Dead as well, except it was really funny, and like at the time I'd seen it, I was sort of just getting into punk rock, so the punk rock soundtrack was a nice element to it. Just, I don't know, it was a really fun movie. Plus, you got a different flip on zombies. You got fast zombies. Also at this time, because of Night of the Living Dead and that being my entry point, I was really big into zombie movies. So watching Return of the Living Dead and then later all the Italian zombie movies, just basically anything that had a zombie in it, or at least like the Romero strand of zombies that would bite and eat people. That was my bag. What really cemented my love for Return of the Living Dead was being able to see it on the big screen. Exhumed Films, which is still operational, still hosting screenings around the New Jersey and Pennsylvania area, they had put together like I think it was a zombie all-nighter of some sorts. I remember Day of the Dead also played, and Return of the Living Dead was in there, and being able to see that on 35 millimeters, seeing everything crystal clear, because that old VHS was a little murky and pan and scan and all that, so you didn't really get the details, but just seeing this beautiful 35 millimeter print was just a revelation, and it kind of changed the movie for me. It went from, man, I really love this movie, to this is one of the best fucking movies I've ever seen. So over the years, Return of the Living Dead was definitely a movie I would revisit, obviously because the July 3rd, 4th of July connection, it made it an obvious choice to watch around then, along with movies like Jaws and, of course, now Roller Coaster. And obviously, this was a movie I wanted to screen for Cinematic Void. I ended up screening it in year 2. It was part of a zombie comedy all-nighter thing I did at the Arrow. We opened with Return of the Living Dead. It played great. I think it was the same 35 millimeter print I saw maybe, probably 15, 20 years ago from Exhumed Films. but you know, it played really well. And a few years after that, I actually re-screened Return of the Living Dead. Now, in general with Cinematic Void, I try not to repeat movies, but I made an exception. I actually made 2 exceptions for this show. Rocky Erickson, famous musician who's on the Return of the Living Dead soundtrack as well as the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 soundtrack, had passed away. So we did a special kind of double feature with both those movies in tribute to Rocky Erickson. But what made this screening extra special was that Caroline Williams from Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, she came out for it, but also got a chance to do a Q&A with Linnea Quigley and Clu Gulager from Return of the Living Dead. And it was a really fun night, except for the fact that I had my cell phone stolen right before I did the Q&A. So I was a little, you know, wasn't really all there and like trying to work past it, but like it was still an incredible night, and it was kind of real honor to be able to sit there and listen to Clu tell stories. Hearing him talk, hearing Linnea talk, and hearing, you know, Caroline talk, and just talking about the movie industry in the 80s in general was really cool. Although Return of the Living Dead is a movie I don't really revisit too often now, mostly because I saw it a lot as a kid. If I go someplace and it happens to be playing, I'm instantly transfixed by it. It's one of those movies I feel like I know from start to finish, every line of dialogue, every little scene. But then anytime I watch it, I feel like I discover new things and like little nuances in there. And that's what makes this movie great. So that's going to wrap up this episode of In the Mouth of Cinemadness. Tell me what you think about it, and tell me about when you were first exposed to Return of the Living Dead. Until next time, see you in the void.
It worked in the movie!
Well, it ain't working now, Frank.
You mean the movie lied?